Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending upon, of course, where you are. It is the day after Christmas, Boxing Day in most of the UK and its former colonies, including Canada. Boxing Day is an interesting day. I come in here today filling in for Mr. Winterbull, who we hope is enjoying his time away. And I feel a little bit like a mix between Robert Cratchit on the first day back to work, having made so much merry on Christmas, and a little bit also from the Charles Dickens story, a little bit like Jacob Marley carrying those heavy chains. These are my heavy chains in front of me today, and we're going to talk a lot about some interesting issues that are going to affect every one of you listening and watching. We may even take a phone call or two if we get down to that situation. I'm looking forward to it. So give you the phone number later. We're not ready for that just yet. I'm a radio guy. My name is Dick Farrel, capital D, please. I've been in the radio business since I was a teenager, and I've stepped up to television, helping out the folks at Newsmax, my pleasure, on this pretty much a holiday week. So if something looks unusual to you, or you say, there's something wrong with that guy, remember, I'm a radio guy. I'm not a host of a television show, although I've had a lot of television experience, mostly as a guest and as a newsmaker. But this is the first time I'm hosting, and I'm glad to be here to host for you. We have a lot of important things to talk about. And on my list, of course, is the president is in Florida, where we are, and he is vacationing, and well-deservedly so. This man had an incredible year. He has worked virtually feverishly on everything he attempted to do. We'll run through some of that. We'll also take a look at his predecessor and what little he accomplished in so long, and the things that we are told he did accomplish, we'll see how negative they are, and compare it to what this current president is doing in the short time he's been in office, with all of the attendant resistance that he has had from the media and groups of people known as snowflakes and never-Trumpers and all those yuckity-yucks. We don't want to give them too much opportunity to continue drawing it in. But I want to tell you, Donald Trump's massive $1.5 trillion tax overhaul was signed into law Friday, which cemented the biggest legislative victory of his year in office, and also approved the short-term spending bill that'll prevent a shutdown later next month. He also wanted to sign the tax bill before he left Washington on Friday, which he did, which was to also live up to another promise to have the tax bill signed into law before Christmas, just in time for those of you who will benefit. And there are 91% of us will benefit immediately from the new tax bill. In fact, if we take a look on this graph right here, you see that, those of us making $10,000 or less, that would be me, we don't pay taxes at all. Then as you go up the ladder, more taxes paid by people earning more money. Now, one of the negative things we've been told about, according to the Tax Policy Center, the tax increase, the tax cut will last till about 2025, when we'll be paying higher taxes. But there aren't any changes yet for the next 7 years. Now, the thing about paying higher taxes in 2025, let me point out, we'll be making more money then. It won't matter if we're paying more taxes. There'll be more people working, there'll be more productivity, there'll be more selling, more buying, more doing, more using, more consuming. And so, consequently, what you have is a tax plan that is structured in such a way to grow the economy, improve our standard of living, which we're in dire need of, and at the same time plan for the future. Now, what happens in 2025? We don't know. Who will be president then? What will the Congress look like then? Maybe President Pierce will be in office. President Pierce was in office over 100 years ago. I'm talking about Mike Pence. Don't confuse Pence and Pierce. It's not a good idea. Today is Boxing Day. Did I mention Boxing Day? Interesting that we bring that up because it has nothing to do with pugilism, nothing to do with Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali. Boxing Day is a day in England, or most of the British Empire, or former British colonies, where they give a little box. They put together a thing called a Christmas box, and in it is usually a gift, or mostly cash, and it's for people to hand over gifts to their service personnel, the milkman, the mailman, the maid, people who do service things for you throughout the year. You probably don't have on your regular Christmas list. So the British in the 17th century invented Boxing Day. Americans confuse it with the boxing ring. But it's also a big shopping day all over, not only over in England and, of course, in Canada, but in the U.S. The Christmas holiday shopping season ended on Sunday night, but another shopping holiday season begins today. Malls across America will see tremendous business today, not just the bringing back of items that people didn't want, but it's also when merchandise is marked down because the consumers are looking forward to that. The producers and the providers, they, of course, are looking more to close out the year with higher sales, so they mark down prices even lower than they were before Christmas, which, of course, we want to take advantage of that. So that's Boxing Day in England and Canada, but in America, it's more like Return Day. Yes, of course, I didn't get my little box, but you? The tax plan we were talking about changes in 2025. No one knows what happens next, but we've been hearing a lot from the media other than Newsmax, of course, because we would never here at Newsmax be involved in anything that wasn't truthful. The word fake news doesn't exist. We make sure never to allow anything like that to happen. But when it comes to other networks, not so much. Now, over at MSNBC, Brian Williams, who has a career, has made a career of making stuff up, he's attacking the president now, saying that the president, Donald Trump, is the one who is destroying public faith in the media. This coming from a man who made up stories about his trips to Iraq, the guy who put fake in fake news. It's just a shocking disclosure that this man has the audacity to blame the president for people's lack of confidence in the media, when, of course, that lack of confidence existed long before Donald Trump announced for president. The media has had a very low rating when it comes to confidence for a long time. And we here at Newsmax are combating it by being truthful. No fake news over here. One of the stories in the news today, what did you get for Christmas? Well, sometimes you get coal if you're bad, or you get nothing. But a Los Angeles psychologist sent a box of manure to the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, at his home in Bel Air in California. Yes, manure from Mnuchin was what this boiled down to. The Secret Service is now investigating after the box was found over the weekend, and they're looking into possibly maybe charging this man. I don't know that there's any charges, but certainly I wouldn't have sent the president like that, anything like that. And during the Obama years, of course, nobody ever told us that, you could send Obama administration officials boxes of manure. President Trump and First Lady Melania have traveled this Christmas to the Episcopal Church in Palm Beach at Bethesda by the Sea. I was lucky enough to be there last year. I didn't make it there this year. The first family was there for Christmas Eve. And as you can see here in this video, they were greeted by well-wishers. Many people snapped pictures, although they're not supposed to do that. And there was a standing ovation and a round of applause. And I can tell you from having been there last year at Christmas, sitting just a few feet away from the Donald, he didn't seem to mind. In fact, I think this man loves the attention, and he deserves the attention. And you know what? It's fun to give it to him. The church has special significance for the couple, who, by the way, were married there in 2005. And the following year, Trump's son Barron was christened at that church. So there you go. It's always a lot of fun to have the president in your own backyard. We here at Newsmax headquarters, South Florida, are not that far away from where the president is staying and playing golf this weekend, and probably for the rest of the week, and we'll stay through New Year's Day when he'll head back to Washington. And in Washington, of course, that's where all the fun begins. That's where the swamp is, and some of the swamp creatures I've taken notice. One of those swamp creatures, Bob Corker, U.S. Senator, who came to the U.S. Senate in 2007, flat broke. He probably could have qualified for food stamps. Today, less than 10 years later, Senator Bob Corker is worth $70 million. There's something wrong with a system like that. I mean, all power to him. I don't know what he did to get it. It had to be legal. But you have to wonder at times when a guy comes in dead broke and suddenly he's a millionaire just by being in Congress for 10 years. Hey, no wonder there are people knocking down the doors to try and get in. Can't say that I blame them. Some of the other things we'll be discussing with you a little later. Yes, we will take calls. I will allow you to call into the show if you want to challenge me on anything I've said or you want to bring something up. So could we put the phone number up there for folks to engage us if they're interested? It's 1-877-639-7629. One more time, 877, you got to use a 1, 639-7629. That is for you to call in if you want to chat with me. Some of the other things, we'll take a look at the snowstorm. One of the biggest snowstorms ever on a Christmas day, 34 inches of snow in Erie, Pennsylvania. We'll take a look at that. The weather in the Northeast is absolutely horrific. There are other huge snowstorms, plus the cold wave in the Midwest, including Chicago, have people literally freezing their icicles off. It is a cold one, and, well, that's what January is. Here in southern Florida, not so much. We're still waiting for a couple of cool days, but that's how it goes. Also on the discussion list is the United Nations. We're going to talk a little bit about how our UN representative, who at one time, while governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, was a virulent anti-Trumper. And she showed it and let it loose. And then when Trump was elected, people were wondering, how did Nikki Haley get nominated to be in the United Nations as our ambassador? Well, we're going to play some of her comments about what has taken place there in recent days. Apparently, Nikki Haley has turned the leaf and has become a rather strong supporter of this administration. And her actions comport with the policies of this administration. We'll hear some of that. We'll hear from Alan Dershowitz, too, who also condemns the UN for their anti-Israel policy. The recent vote in the United Nations, 159 nations voted against the United States and Israel and the policy of moving the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But we get good news today from another UN representative nation. Guatemala has announced that it will take part in moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that's the first of what should be many. After all, a country decides for itself where its capital city should be. Nobody tells us that we have to have our capital in New York or Washington or Philadelphia. We have it in Washington because we want it in Washington. Why should any country tell us where we can put our capital? Consequently, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he says, our capital is Jerusalem. It is the heart and soul of Israel and always will be. And you know what? His Christmas Day message yesterday was for Christians throughout the world to embrace peace. And the man's right. He wants his capital in Jerusalem. It's not our business to tell him where to put it. And it is our business to do business with him in his capital city, not 40 miles away in Tel Aviv. Even though it's more comfortable and Tel Aviv is more metropolitan, it's a better city, and yeah, we can make that argument, but I won't. I'm for Jerusalem. So should you be. We're back in a short time. We'll take a short break and come right back with much more here on the Brett Winterble Show. I'm filling in, Dick Farrell, until 1 o'clock today, right here on Newsmax.
Is Israel truly deserving of 86% of the world's condemnation? Or possibly is something else afoot at the United Nations, something that allows the representative of the Assad government to lecture the United States for moving its embassy?
This is Dick Farrell back in for Brett Winterble, and you just heard from Jake Tapper on CNN slamming the countries that voted against the U.S. and its decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, came out pretty strongly and wants the UN to remember, or we will remember, the countries that voted against us. We have, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, cut $285 million from what we pay the United Nations. And, of course, we are the highest payer of any funds to that organization. Ambassador Haley has announced that we will be cutting back some of that money. And those nations that did not vote with us, next time they come around with their handout, whenever they come around with their handout, we're not going to tell them where to put that hand, back in their own pocket. Let's hear Ambassador Haley.
The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do.
There you have Ambassador Haley speaking loudly and clearly to the members of the United Nations. For so many years, Americans have been the doormat at the UN because of our foreign policy backing the state of Israel and other things that we've done. But we have never seen a president or an administration or a UN ambassador be so strong in their reaction to what's been happening in the United Nations. This is the first time in my lifetime, and I'm, believe it or not, 61 years old. The last time I remember a UN ambassador being so strong and so forthright and so direct towards our adversaries at the UN was probably way back in the 60s when Arthur J. Goldberg, a former U.S. Supreme Court justice, was our ambassador to the UN. And he took that job, pretty interesting enough, if you're old enough to remember. President Lyndon Johnson appointed him to the UN ambassadorship, asking him to please retire from the Supreme Court to do it. An unprecedented request by a president. But remember, the president is the chief officer, the commander-in-chief. If he asks you to do something, you do it. He asked Arthur Goldberg to quit the Supreme Court, to join the UN, and he did a wonderful, incredible job during a most difficult time in our history, back during the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1967. Pope Francis, who has weighed in on numerous occasions on the Middle East and others, had something to say this weekend during his Christmas homily. He has called for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. He made those remarks during a speech at the Vatican. He says the two sides need to resume dialogue and reach a conclusion where they can coexist with mutually agreed upon international and recognized borders. However, I need to point out to you that the Palestinian Authority has failed to recognize the right of Israel to even exist. How do you deal with someone on a civil basis when they don't agree that you have a right to exist? I don't see how. The Pope, I must say, well-meaning, no doubt. I'm sure his intentions are forthright, but he fails and lacks the ability to recognize there's just no two-state solution going to solve this problem. Also agreeing to cutting nearly the $300 million from the UN budget, the United States provides more than 22% of the UN's core budget. Professor Alan Dershowitz praised the move. Alan Dershowitz, I believe, had this to say. Alan.
It's about time we sent a message to the UN, which has become a place of hate when it comes to the United States and Israel. You know that Abba Eban, who is Israel's representative to the UN, once said that if Algeria introduced a resolution that the earth was flat and that Israel flattened it, it would win.
It's on the front page of our current edition of Newsmax magazine. If you haven't seen it already, you should. Alan Dershowitz says that Democrats and Republicans are using the law as a political weapon, and that is a threat to democracy. Read all about it, Newsmax magazine. One of the things I am addicted to. But getting back to the Pope and his comments and what Professor Dershowitz had to say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of those that is intractable. Our president has promised as part of his campaign and has announced on more than one occasion with his Secretary of State that the plan is to bring about a peace. We'll have a peace treaty. Saudi Arabia has put away their swords and has begun talking about relations with Israel. And these are all primarily based on the adversary that all three of those countries I've mentioned have in common. That would be the Ayatollah in Iran, a vicious, dangerous threat already confronting the Saudis in Yemen. And they make no bones about who their enemy is. Remember now, these are both Muslims. Both sides are Muslims. One side is Sunni Muslim. The other side is the Shia Muslims. They do not get along. In fact, they do not get along so poorly that one side is willing to shake hands with the Hebrews, which almost never happened before. Just this past summer, you may recall, while fighting against ISIS, Jordan's King Hussein has said, Jordan's King Abdullah, Hussein was his father. Jordan's King Abdullah received military equipment from the Israelis. Imagine Israel sending military equipment across the border into Jordan to help fight against ISIS, something that was unthinkable just maybe a few short years ago. But as it is, we also noticed that in the United Nations, there were many abstentions, which was very disheartening. These are countries that voted against the United States because they didn't vote at all. An abstention from voting is the same as a no vote. That is why we really need to be doing something about what's happening with our money going to the United Nations. Big Labor says that there should be some huge growth coming up in the tax plan. We're going to be taking a look at that and more on the Steve Mnuchin receiving not coal, but something that sounds more like his name and at his home in Bel Air, California. And the Kremlin has new fears about new U.S. sanctions, claiming they may be unbearable. We're going to talk about Korea when we come back. The saber rattling continues. And today on Newsmax.com, there's even a story about how President Trump has requested or ordered the military to prepare to shoot down any missiles that North Korea fires that may even be looking like they're going toward Guam or any of our U.S. allies. We're going to be taking a look at that. Also, a look around the country at the weather. The weather is awful. A JetBlue flight skid off the runway in Boston this morning because of the wintry weather. We're going to have some video from around the country about the blizzard warnings in Pennsylvania and New York and all of those, as much as we can tell you about. And through all that, including another look at the United Nations, we did get some success out of them over the weekend. The United Nations did vote unanimously, at least the Security Council did, to, and this is part of our North Korea discussion, to tighten the sanctions economically and otherwise on the North Korean regime. And this is something that really needs to be done. The Chinese, we believe, have always been close allies. In fact, they are North Korea's client state. But they voted to tighten sanctions. This tells us something. It's a big, important change in the way things have been looking. We'll be back in just a moment. There's more to talk about here on the Brett Winterble Show. I'm Dick Farrell, a radio guy playing television just for the week. So I'm glad you're tuned in to us, and maybe we'll take some phone calls too coming up in the next segment right here on Newsmax TV. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Glad you could be here. Glad I could be here, too. It is the day after Christmas, also known as St. Stephen's Day, Boxing Day in the British Empire and points beyond. The weather for us has not been anything exciting, but before we get to weather, just a moment before we get to the weather, a little discussion about what our newscast was just about. The president says that there's no way of determining whether or not the things in that dossier are true. We have to remember, and you won't hear this anywhere else, except on Newsmax TV, I'm sorry to say, the dossier was created, contrived, produced, and delivered entirely with Democrat donations for the presidency campaign of Hillary Rodham Clinton. It was campaign literature that was used to go to the FISA court to ask the court for the permission to spy on Republican candidates for the president and elsewhere. That means, though, spying that was done was entirely illegal. Trumped up, literally, I hate to use that word, but trumped up. Entirely based on made-up stuff in a dossier that was paid for by Democrat dollars in a presidential campaign. The runway at Logan International Airport. Passengers needed to help to get off the plane were then bused to a terminal. A lot of states in the north continue to battle a massive snowstorm. Let's find out some more. With the wintry weather arriving, New York bringing snow and icy conditions to that city and other parts of the Northeast in time for the next holiday weekend, which, of course, next weekend is another holiday weekend. According to the U.S. network NBC, a winter weather advisory has been issued for Buffalo until Saturday. Temperatures are expected to hover just under the freezing mark for the rest of the day. People driving or out walking can expect icy conditions, and you may slip a bit. There you go. A blizzard. All right, we're going to take a look and see what the blizzard warning looks like in Pittsburgh right now. All right, it's this blizzard warning is in effect for western Pennsylvania. Forecasters say snow of up to 10 inches and wind gusts up to 50 could make traveling dangerous. Snow and strong winds also made travel difficult for people along Lake Erie and in Buffalo and in New York and Pennsylvania. There you have it. Please be careful out there. Something in Florida we don't know much about. That would be snow, winter, snow tires, blizzards. Coming up, I wanted to mention the UN Security Council is imposing newer, tougher sanctions against North Korea in a recent response to their use of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The sanctions aim to cut the North's access to refined petroleum and crude oil. Pyongyang called the sanctions an economic blockade and an act of war. And we have time for Nikki Haley to tell us what she said at the UN. All right, we're going to do that in the next segment then. But Pyongyang, U.S. diplomats have made clear that they are seeking a negotiated solution to reverse the rising tension on the Korean Peninsula. President Donald Trump has derided talks as useless and said the communist country must abandon its nuclear weapons before any talks continue. And he's absolutely 100% right. There is no left, right, Democrat, or Republican about Korea. They must be neutralized. Otherwise, we are going to see World War III. It's time for another break. We'll be right back, and we'll take your phone calls. I'll give you the phone numbers when we get back, too. Right here on Newsmax TV, I'm Dick Farrell, a radio guy filling in for a TV guy named Brett Winterbill. We'll be right back, so whatever you do, don't go away. Dick Farrell back here playing TV guy, but I'm a radio guy, have been for most of my life. TV is kind of new to me, but I think I get the hang of it. It is Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. If you didn't get what you wanted for Christmas, maybe you'll get it now. Get yourself a present. You know, what the time between Christmas and New Year's is when you should treat yourself to something after going crazy for the last 2 months. Gee, I remember back in Labor Day when the store started stocking Christmas decorations right after Labor Day. It's crazy. The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, talking tough sanctions against North Korea and getting her way. The interesting thing about this, as I pointed out, is that the ambassador tells the United Nations that we're going to remember you when it comes to Israel and the vote in the UN, but when it comes to North Korea, doesn't have to bother. They all are on the right page, as we'll find out from what she said right here.
Their arrogance and hostility to anything productive has set their country on a destructive path. 9 times before today, we have asked the North Korean regime to choose the path of peace. And if they do, we would welcome them back into the community of nations. But Pyongyang has chosen the path of isolation. As we have in the past, we will continue to match the Kim regime's choice of aggressive actions with actions of international sanction.
Once again, Nikki Haley, she's the heavy hitter of the Trump administration in the United Nations, telling them what we have to say about Pyongyang and their bellicose attitude towards its neighbors and the U.S. Now, an important thing to observe here is that Pyongyang is just 45 miles from the border with South Korea. South Korea's capital is only 30 miles from the border with North Korea. If there's any kind of exchange, militarily or otherwise, between these two nations, it could be rather devastating for both. South Korea is a relatively solid military power. They can put as many as 11 million men in uniform with guns if need be. North Korea couldn't do that. But their advantage is that they have huge numbers of tanks and artillery bearing down on the capital city of Seoul. That's where the rub is. But at the United Nations, of course, Security Council imposed these new tougher sanctions in response to their intercontinental ballistic missile tests. The sanctions are aimed to cut North Korea's access to refined petroleum. Pyongyang called the sanctions an economic blockade and an act of war. Diplomats have made it clear they're seeking a negotiated solution to reverse the tension. President Trump has derided the talks as useless, and he says the communist country must abandon its nuclear weapons before anything can happen. And the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, says the sanctions are the right thing to do right now. All righty. It is, as I mentioned earlier, it is that time of year when things go back to the store. 96 million Americans are believed to be headed to the malls and stores today to return gifts. But the holiday shopping spree that went on prior to yesterday apparently is up 10% from last year. We have now seen a larger number of people shopping and spending money. Could it be the economy? Could it be people are just feel a little more free with their dollars? Could it be maybe there's just more people around? We don't know, but when the Christmas holiday shopping season comes around and it looks better than it did the year before, obviously something is going on there. Something looks good. Something is improving in our economy. And maybe it was people are excited about the tax cut. They're going to have more money in their pocketbook. And, of course, with more money, people spend it. This is a point I wanted to make. We're hearing that, and tomorrow, by the way, on this show, I'll be in for Brent Winterbill again. Joining me will be Michael Solomon. He's a regular commentator on this network. He'll be joining me tomorrow to take apart the actual numbers, the minutia, if you will, of Mnuchin's plan that has now been signed into law, because Steve Mnuchin is a major determining factor in how this thing was crafted. He'll be here to tell us about it, but I can point out to you that we're hearing from the Democrat Party leaders and much of the media that this tax break is a disaster, that it's going to bring Armageddon, it's going to be the end of life as we know it. I mean, we are hearing hysterical proportions of complaints about the Trump tax plan, which is now signed into law. I need to point this out. The complaint the left has about, oh, the corporations are going to get millions of dollars of tax money in their pockets, looted right out of the Treasury. This is nonsense, and here's why. If you know anything about business, if you know anything about commerce, you know anything about how it's conducted, businesses spend money. What do you think? They hold on to it, they hoard it, they put it offshore and keep it in mattresses? They spend their money. If businesses have more money to spend, they will expand, they will have more research and development, they will hire more workers. Yes, to some extent there'll be better paychecks for the executives, but that's expected. I'm telling you that the tax plan, and we'll discuss it in detail with Mr. Solomon tomorrow on this show, the tax plan ultimately will give everyone a leg up. As I say, a rising tide raises all ships. So I do want you to know that we'll be here to tell you the truth when the others don't even want to tell you. Back in a moment, we'll be here on the Brent Winterbill Show. Dick Farrell filling in. Glad to have your attention. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Glad you could be here. Glad I could be here. I'm Dick Farrell, a radio guy filling in for TV guy Brent Winterbill. This time of year, they do that. You know, the radio guys are like the minor league, and they let them come out and swing the bat, kind of like the minor leaguers come up to the major league in September. They see how good they are, and then they tell them goodbye. In a moment, I want to tell you about one more article that I just read in Newsmax magazine. I don't want you to miss it because it's something you won't find anywhere else, and it'll be great fodder for you to use when dealing with people who disagree with you. Meanwhile, the Washington Post is telling us this afternoon that the House Intelligence Chairman, Devin Nunes, and some other Republicans are considering writing a report about the alleged FBI corruption. The report would focus on the conduct of FBI officials during the probe into the Russian meddling during last year's election. According to the Post, Democrat lawmaker Adam Schiff, who's the ranking member in that committee, says the of the oversight. It's not the GOP's intent. And I'm thinking, when are they going to realize that there's no there? We've been looking into Russia, corruption, collusion for some 17, 18 months now, and they've come up with nothing. This is a way to sow nothing. And most importantly, the whole thing is contrived from a fake dossier paid for by the Democrat campaign committee and fraudulently used to convince a court to allow the FBI to spy on people. Now, when Richard Nixon spied on people in 1972, he faced impeachment. By 1974, he would have been impeached, but instead resigned. We are in a situation similar to that right now, only it's in reverse. There's nothing there, and yet they're holding a president who's done so much, they're holding him responsible. We have one segment coming up, but I do want to make note that you should see this article in Newsmax magazine this month by Betsy McCoy, the former lieutenant governor of New York. She outlines how the president is draining the swamp and what else he needs to do, and some of his accomplishments in these first 12 months in office. It's rather interesting reading, and it'll give you great firepower when talking to those people who contain their listening to just the liberal media. You'll know more than they do, and that's probably where the problem exists. All right, we're back in just a moment. We'll take a look at the NFL playoff picture and the poor attendance that they're having and how the weather's not going to help them either. Right back in a minute. Welcome back. Our final segment together today, and I'll be back tomorrow. Coming up after the news, you'll be hearing from Jonathan Gillum, a former U.S. Navy SEAL who's been in law enforcement and written books, so he'll be interesting. I'd like to watch it. I'll sit down in the office and pay attention. You know, it's the last weekend of the NFL coming up this weekend, and around the NFL, they're talking playoffs. The top two teams in the NFC are the Eagles and the Vikings. The AFC are the New England Patriots and the Pittsburgh Steelers, where it's snowing heavily today. Other teams to look out for are the Saints and the Rams, as the Chiefs are too. And we'll be taking a look at that tomorrow a little bit more as well. Listen, have yourself a great day. Glad to have been here today. Stay tuned. We've got a newscast for you, plus John Gillum. My name is Dick Farrell. Yes, I'm a radio guy playing on TV. A lot of fun being here. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow, noon to 1 Eastern on Newsmax TV, a place I just can't get enough of.